Regina can never be seen. She can never be desired. Because years ago, she learned that for women like her, visibility means destruction. So Regina hides, working silently in the Duke of Blackthorn's manor, which would be fine if she wasn't achingly aware of him. A man so cold, so powerful, he might as well be untouchable. A man who has never truly looked at her. Until tonight, at the masked ball, Regina becomes someone else entirely, hidden behind silk and shadow, and suddenly, the Duke sees her, so she allows herself one forbidden night. What's the harm? By morning, she'll disappear, and he'll never know it was her. Except, the Duke doesn't forget, and the most powerful man in London is now quietly hunting for a woman who was never supposed to exist. A woman hiding 3 floors above him. Close enough to touch, if only he knew where to look. Hey, quick question, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. I'm working toward 10,000 subscribers, and if Regina's story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button for Auriella Duke Romance Library. Smash the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Alright, thank you. Now let's get back to what happens when the woman who made herself invisible becomes the one obsession the Duke can't escape. There are mistakes a woman can recover from. A careless word, a misplaced glance, even a broken engagement, if handled delicately enough. But Regina Wells had made the one mistake society never forgave. She had been wanted by the wrong man. And now, he was looking for her. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor, casting long shadows across the ledgers spread before Regina. Her pen moved with practiced precision, each number recorded in a hand so steady it might have been carved rather than written. This was her gift. This was her safety, invisibility. In the Duke of Blackthorn's household, she existed as a breath exists in winter air, necessary, present, but never truly seen. She managed accounts, organized correspondence, ensured the machinery of aristocratic life ran without interruption, and in return, she asked for nothing except to be overlooked. Because in Victorian society, a woman's reputation was not merely her dignity, it was her life. Regina pressed her fingers against the cool wood of the desk, while steadying herself against a memory she had spent 2 years trying to bury. Victor Collins. The name alone sent ice through her veins. He had been a guest at a previous estate where she worked. Charming, persuasive, dangerous. He had cornered her in a library, his breath wine-soaked and hot against her neck. When she refused him, he had spread whispers anyway. Lies about impropriety, about willingness, about shame. She had survived only because the mistress of that house had been merciful enough to provide a reference, though everyone knew what whispered recommendations truly meant. Damaged goods. Handle carefully. So Regina had come to Blackthorn Manor and rebuilt herself as a woman made of silence and efficiency. She arrived before dawn. She left after dusk. She spoke only when necessary and smiled even less. And it had worked. Though for 3 years it had worked, until the Duke himself began to notice. Edwin Blackthorn was not a man who inspired comfort. He was tall, dark-haired, with eyes the color of winter storms, and a mouth that seemed designed never to curve into warmth. Society feared him. Women desired him. Men envied and resented him in equal measure. He was power itself, wrapped in perfectly tailored evening clothes and impossible control. Regina had learned to move through the manor like water around stone. When he entered a room, she found reasons to leave. When he spoke, she answered in as few words as possible. When his gaze drifted toward her, she made herself smaller, quieter, less. But lately, something had shifted. She felt it in the weight of silence when she presented reports, or in the way he studied her handwriting, as though searching for something hidden between the lines, in the deliberate care he took not to stand too close, as though he too recognized the danger of proximity. Miss Wells. His voice cut through her thoughts like a blade through silk. Regina's pen froze above the ledger. She did not look up. Could not. Your Grace. The accounts for the northern properties. Are they complete? They will be by evening, Your Grace. Silence stretched between them. She could feel him waiting, as though expecting her to fill the space with unnecessary words. But Regina had learned long ago that silence was a woman's best defense. You are efficient, Miss Wells. It was not a compliment. It was an observation, delivered in a tone that suggested he found efficiency either suspicious or insufficiently interesting. Oh, thank you, Your Grace. Another pause. Then the sound of his footsteps, measured and unhurried, as he moved toward the door. Regina allowed herself a slow breath, her shoulders releasing tension she had not realized she carried. There will be a gathering here in 3 days' time, the Duke said without turning, a masked ball. You will ensure the household preparations are flawless. Of course, Your Grace. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Regina set down her pen and pressed her palms flat against the desk, willing her pulse to steady. 3 years she had maintained this distance. 3 years of perfect invisibility. She could survive 3 more days. She had to. The invitation arrived that evening, slipped beneath her door like a secret. Regina stared at the cream-colored card. Her name written in elegant script she recognized immediately. Evangeline Foster, the only woman in London who still called Regina a friend, despite the whispers that clung to her past like perfume. Dearest Regina, you must attend the Duke's ball. I have secured you a mask and a gown. Do not argue. Do not refuse. For once in your careful life, allow yourself to be seen. I will call for you at 8. E. Regina's fingers trembled as she traced the words. Allow yourself to be seen. Evangeline did not understand. Could not understand. Visibility was death for women like Regina. One misstep, one recognition, one whisper connecting her to scandal, and Victor Collins would emerge from whatever dark corner he now occupied to finish what he had started. She should refuse. She should burn the invitation and triple-check the household preparations and remain exactly where she belonged, in the shadows, safe. But something in her chest tightened at the thought. Something she had buried so deeply she barely recognized it anymore. Longing. Not for society, not for status, but for one single night where she might exist as something other than a ghost moving through other people's lives. Regina closed her eyes and made a decision that would unravel everything. She would go. Just once. Just one night. And then she would disappear again, back into the safety of silence, and no one would ever know. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Regina coordinated servants, approved menus, ensured every candelabra gleamed and every surface shone. She worked until her hands cramped and her eyes burned. Because work was the only thing that silenced the voice in her head, whispering that she was making a terrible mistake. On the 3rd morning, she encountered the Duke again. He stood in the main hall, examining a painting that had hung there for decades, as though seeing it for the first time. Regina moved quietly toward the stairs, hoping to pass unnoticed. Miss Wells. She stopped, turned, kept her eyes level with his collar. Your Grace. You have managed the preparations well. Thank you, Your Grace. He moved closer. Not threateningly, not inappropriately, but enough that Regina could smell the faint scent of bergamot and something darker, something that made her pulse quicken against her will. Will you attend the ball yourself? He asked. The question caught her off guard. Regina risked a glance upward and immediately regretted it. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. "I had not planned to, Your Grace. Your duties will be complete by then." It was not a question. "You should attend." Regina's throat tightened. "I would not wish to intrude." "You would not be intruding." His voice dropped, just slightly. "You would be a guest." Something in the way he said it made Regina's chest constrict. There was no warmth in his tone, no particular kindness, but there was attention, focus, the kind of regard Regina had spent 3 years avoiding. "I will consider it, Your Grace." A lie. She had already decided, but she could not let him know that, could not let him see anything beyond the blank, efficient mask she had perfected. The Duke studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once. "See that you do." He walked away, leaving Regina alone in the hall with her racing heart and the terrible certainty that she had just made everything infinitely more complicated. When Evangeline arrived that evening with a dress bag and a wicked smile, Regina almost turned her away. "Absolutely not," Evangeline said, sweeping past her into the small room Regina occupied on the manor's 3rd floor. "You are going. I have already bribed the seamstress and stolen the perfect mask. Do not make my crimes pointless." Regina closed the door and leaned against it. "Evangeline, you do not understand. If anyone recognizes me, they will not." Evangeline opened the bag with a flourish, revealing silk the color of midnight. "This is not a dress for a woman who wishes to be known. Or this is a dress for a woman who wishes to be anyone else for a single evening." The gown was beautiful, understated but elegant, with sleeves that would cover her arms and a neckline modest enough not to draw scandal. The mask Evangeline produced was delicate silver filigree, designed to obscure the upper half of her face while leaving her mouth and chin visible. "You will be a mystery," Evangeline said softly. "Not Regina Wells, not anyone they know. Just a woman at a ball, dancing and drinking champagne and remembering what it feels like to exist." Regina touched the silk with trembling fingers. "And if something goes wrong? Then you leave. You slip away before midnight like every good story demands, and no one will ever know." Evangeline's expression softened. "Regina, you have been punishing yourself for 2 years for something that was not your fault. Allow yourself one night, please." Regina closed her eyes, felt the weight of all her careful defenses, all her practiced invisibility, and beneath it, something desperate and aching and alive. "One night," she whispered. Evangeline smiled. "One night." The ball began at 9. Regina stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, her heart a wild thing in her chest. The mask felt strange against her skin, both a shield and a vulnerability. Around her, London's aristocracy swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and jewels and laughter, and at the center of it all stood Duke Edwin Blackthorne. He wore black, as always. No mask, because men of his status did not hide. He stood near the musicians, a glass of wine in one hand, his expression unreadable as he surveyed his guests with the detached interest of a man observing a game he had no intention of playing. Regina should have turned around, should have fled back to her room and torn off the dress and remembered her place. But she did not. Instead, she stepped forward into the light. And everything changed. The champagne tasted like stars and danger. Regina stood near a column, half hidden in shadow, watching the dancers spin across the floor in patterns as precise and meaningless as the social rules that governed them. She sipped slowly, rationing her courage, reminding herself that she could leave at any moment. No one had recognized her. No one had even looked at her twice. She was safe. Anonymous. free. You are standing in the worst possible location. The voice came from directly behind her, low and edged with something that might have been amusement. Regina's entire body went rigid. She turned slowly. The Duke stood less than 3 feet away, his storm-grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "Your Grace." The words came out steadier than she felt. "That column." He gestured without looking away from her. "It is situated precisely where the musicians cannot be properly heard, and the dancers cannot be properly seen. You have chosen to attend a ball and observe nothing." Regina's mind raced. He did not recognize her. Could not. The mask obscured enough, and she had never allowed him to study her face closely enough to memorize it. She was safe. She just needed to remain calm. "Perhaps I prefer observation to participation," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. One dark eyebrow rose slightly. "Do you?" It was not a question. It was a challenge. Regina lifted her chin. The mask gave her courage she did not normally possess. Dancing requires a partner. Observation requires only patience. And you possess patience. In abundance, Your Grace. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening of the hard edges that usually defined him. "Then perhaps you have been observing the wrong things." He extended his hand. Regina stared at it, at the long fingers and the pale scar across his knuckles, and the absolute certainty in the gesture. This was not a request. It was an expectation. She should refuse, should make an excuse and disappear into the crowd, and never allow this moment to extend another second. Instead, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, were warm and certain, and Regina felt something dangerous unfold in her chest, something she had spent 3 years carefully smothering. Want. The Duke led her onto the floor with the same controlled precision he applied to everything. Other couples shifted to make room, eyes tracking them with open curiosity. Regina kept her gaze fixed on his collar, fighting the urge to run. "You are trembling," he observed. "The champagne," Regina lied. "I see." His hand settled at her waist, firm but not possessive. "And does champagne usually make you shake, or only when consumed at poorly chosen vantage points?" Regina risked a glance upward, and found him watching her with something that almost resembled interest. Real interest, not the polite attention he offered to society women who bored him. "Only when I am unaccustomed to it," she said. "Unaccustomed to champagne, or to dancing?" "Both." The music swelled, and they moved together with a synchronicity that should not have been possible. Regina had learned to dance as a girl, before her world had narrowed to ledgers and silence. Her body remembered the steps, even as her mind screamed warnings. "You dance well for someone unaccustomed to it," the Duke said. "You dance well for someone who looks perpetually disinterested in everything." The words escaped before she could stop them. Horror flooded through Regina as she realized what she had just said. To the Duke, to a man who could ruin her with a single word. But instead of anger, his mouth curved. Just slightly, barely enough to qualify as a smile, but there nonetheless. "Disinterest is often the safest public face," he said quietly. "And in private?" The question hung between them. Regina did not know what madness had possessed her. This was not who she was. Careful, invisible Regina did not flirt with dukes, did not ask dangerous questions, did not exist loudly enough to be answered. But behind the mask, she was someone else. Someone braver. Someone who wanted things she had no right to want. "In private," the Duke said, his voice dropping to something that shivered against her skin. "I am rarely disinterested." His hand tightened at her waist, just barely. just enough that Regina felt the pressure through silk and stays and the fragile armor of propriety. They turned together, moving through the other dancers like water, like something inevitable. Regina's pulse thundered in her ears. She was playing with fire. She knew this. They understood the danger with absolute clarity. But she could not seem to stop. "You have an advantage over me," the Duke said after a long silence. "I do. You know who I am. I do not know who you are." Regina's breath caught. "Does that bother you?" "Profoundly." The admission sent heat spiraling through her. This was wrong. This entire situation violated every rule she had constructed to protect herself. But the mask made her reckless. The champagne made her bold. And the way he looked at her, as though she were the only real thing in a room full of beautiful illusions, made her want to be someone worth looking at. "Perhaps some mysteries are better left unsolved," she said softly. "Perhaps." His eyes searched her face, lingering on her mouth. "Or perhaps they are simply more interesting." The music ended. The Duke did not release her immediately. For 3 heartbeats, they stood motionless, while around them the ballroom returned to conversation and movement. His hand remained at her waist. His fingers still held hers. "Walk with me," he said. It was not a command. Not quite. But it was not a request either. Regina knew she should refuse, should curtsy politely, and disappear into the crowd and end this before it became something she could not control. Instead, she nodded. The Duke's expression did not change, but something in his eyes intensified. He offered his arm and Regina took it, allowing him to guide her through the ballroom toward the tall doors that led to the gardens. The night air was cool against Regina's skin, a sharp contrast to the heat of the ballroom. Lanterns hung from trees, casting pools of golden light across manicured paths. The sounds of the ball faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of wind through leaves and the distant splash of a fountain. They walked in silence. The Duke's arm beneath her hand was solid, real, nothing like the distant figure she had spent 3 years avoiding. He led her down a path lined with roses, their scent heavy and sweet in the darkness. "You intrigue me," he said finally. Regina's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because you are not like the others. The other women at the ball? The other women anywhere." He stopped walking and turned to face her. In the lantern light, his features were softer, younger, almost vulnerable. "They perform. You exist." Regina did not know how to respond to that. The words felt too true, too close to the core of who she actually was beneath the mask and the silk. "Perhaps I am performing as well," she said carefully. "No." His hand lifted, and for a moment Regina thought he might touch her face, might remove the mask and see her truly. But his fingers stopped just short, hovering in the space between them. "You are the only genuine thing I have encountered in months." The loneliness in those words struck Regina like a physical blow. This man, who commanded rooms with his presence alone, who bent society to his will with barely a word, was lonely as she was. "Your Grace, Edwin." His voice was rough. "When we are alone, you may call me Edwin." Regina's heart stuttered. First names. The intimacy of it felt more dangerous than anything else that had happened this evening. You should not be here at all," Edwin interrupted. "Neither should I. We should both be inside, playing our assigned roles, maintaining proper distance." His hand finally made contact, his fingers brushing her jaw so lightly she might have imagined it. "But I find I no longer care about what I should do." Regina could not breathe, could not think, could only feel the warmth of his touch and the intensity of his gaze, and the terrible knowledge that she was about to cross a line she could never uncross. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "I know. If anyone sees, no one will see." His thumb traced the edge of her mask. "We are shadows, you and I. Ghosts moving through a world that does not truly see us." The words resonated through Regina's chest. Yes, that was exactly what she was. A ghost. A woman who had learned to exist without being seen, because being seen meant being destroyed. But here, now, in the garden darkness, with a man who should terrify her, she wanted to be seen. Just once. Just tonight. Edwin's hand slid to the back of her neck, his fingers threading through hair that had taken Evangeline an hour to arrange. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, and Regina felt the shudder of his breath, the tension in his body that matched her own. "Tell me to stop," he said. Regina closed her eyes, felt the precipice beneath her feet, knew with absolute certainty that one more step would send her tumbling into ruin, and chose to step forward anyway. "No," she breathed. Edwin's mouth found hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was hunger and restraint breaking simultaneously, to 3 years of careful distance shattering in a heartbeat. His hands tightened in her hair, her fingers clutched at his coat, and between them bloomed heat that had nothing to do with champagne and everything to do with the recognition of two people who had been alone too long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Edwin rested his forehead against hers again. "Come with me," he said. Not a question, an offer, a choice. Regina knew what he was asking, understood the invitation and its implications. If she went with him now, there would be no pretending nothing had happened. No returning to safe invisibility. But the alternative was walking away from this moment, this connection, this single night where she had been allowed to exist as something other than a careful collection of defenses. She looked up at him through the mask, at the man society feared, and she had avoided, and saw only longing that matched her own. "Yes," she whispered. Edwin's hand closed around hers, and he led her deeper into the gardens, toward a gate she had never noticed before, toward private rooms where the rest of the world could not follow, toward a choice that would change everything. The room Edwin brought her to was not what Regina expected. She had anticipated opulence, gold and marble and the kind of excessive wealth that aristocrats displayed like armor. Instead, the space was quiet, understated. A fire burned low in the grate, casting warm light across dark wood furniture and walls lined with books. A single window overlooked the gardens, curtains open to the night. It was a private sanctuary, was a place where the Duke retreated from the performance of his public life. And he had brought her here. Regina stood just inside the door, suddenly aware of every heartbeat, every breath. The mask still covered her face, but it felt inadequate now, too thin a barrier between her real identity and this dangerous intimacy. Edwin moved to the fire, adding wood without calling for a servant. The flames climbed higher, painting shadows across his profile. When he turned back to her, some of the intensity from the garden had softened into something quieter, more vulnerable. "You may leave," he said. "No one would fault you." Regina's fingers tightened in her skirts. "Would you?" "Fault you?" A pause. "No, but I would regret it." The honesty in those words loosened something in Regina's chest. He was giving her an escape, a permission to run before either of them crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She should take it. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to turn around, to walk out that door, to return to the safety of invisibility before this moment consumed her. But she had spent 3 years running, 3 years hiding, 3 years existing as half a person, too afraid of ruin to ever truly live. Tonight, she wanted to be whole. Regina reached up and removed her mask. Edwin went completely still. His eyes widened fractionally, the first genuine surprise she had seen from him. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, stopping close enough that Regina had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You are magnificent," he said quietly. No one had ever called Regina magnificent. Efficient, perhaps. Useful. Invisible. But never magnificent. "You do not know me," she whispered. "No." His hand rose to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "But I want to." The admission hung between them, more intimate than any kiss. Regina felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away furiously. She could not cry. Not now, not when she had chosen this. "I cannot give you my name," she said. Edwin's jaw tightened. "Cannot or will not?" "Both." Silence stretched. Regina waited for anger, for the cold withdrawal of a man denied something he wanted, but instead, Edwin's expression shifted into something that looked almost like understanding. "Then give me tonight," he said. "No names, no histories. Just this. Just this." The words felt like absolution and damnation simultaneously. Regina nodded, not trusting her voice. Edwin's mouth found hers again, but this time the kiss was different, slower, deeper. A claiming that made Regina's knees weak and her hands clutch at his shoulders for balance. He walked her backward until her spine met the wall, his body a solid presence, caging her in without making her feel trapped. His lips traced her jaw, her throat, the hollow behind her ear. Regina gasped, her head falling back, fingers threading through his hair. She had never been touched like this, with reverence and hunger combined, as though she were both precious and desperately needed. "Tell me if I go too far," Edwin murmured against her skin. Regina could barely form words. "How will I know?" His answering laugh was rough, almost pained. "You will know." His hands moved to the fastenings of her gown with practiced efficiency, and Regina felt a flicker of something that might have been jealousy. How many women had he done this with? How many nameless encounters in darkened rooms? But then his fingers fumbled slightly on a particularly stubborn button, and she realized with a shock that he was nervous. This controlled, powerful man was nervous. The realization steadied her, made her bold. Regina reached up and began working the buttons of his waistcoat. Edwin froze. His eyes met hers, dark and intense and questioning. "I chose this," Regina said softly. "I choose you." Something in his expression cracked. He caught her hands, bringing them to his mouth, pressing kisses across her knuckles with a tenderness that made Regina's chest ache. "I do not deserve you," he said. "You do not know me well enough to determine that." "Then let me learn." And he did. Well, they moved to the bed slowly, shedding layers of clothing and pretense with equal care. Regina's gown pooled on the floor in a whisper of silk. Edwin's coat and waistcoat followed. The firelight painted them both in gold and shadow, turning the moment into something that felt outside of time, outside of consequence. Regina stood before him, in nothing but her chemise, feeling more exposed than she ever had. Not because of the thinness of fabric, but because of the way Edwin looked at her, as though she were art, as though she mattered. "You are shaking again," he observed. "I am nervous." "Have you done this before?" The question was gentle, but Regina heard the weight beneath it. Her answer would change how he proceeded, how careful he needed to be. "No," she admitted. Edwin closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the hunger had banked into something softer, more controlled. "Then we will go slowly," he said. He drew her down onto the bed with a gentleness that made Regina's throat tight. His hands traced patterns across her skin, learning her responses, finding the places that made her gasp or arch into his touch. And he talked to her, low words of reassurance and desire, asking what she liked, what she wanted, making her feel like a participant rather than a vessel. When he finally moved over her, settling between her thighs with careful deliberation, Regina felt no fear. Only anticipation. Only the certainty that this moment, this choice, was hers. "Look at me," Edwin commanded softly. Regina's eyes met his. "Stay with me," he said. And as he joined their bodies, as Regina felt the sharp ache give way to something deeper and more consuming, she understood what he meant. "Stay present. Stay here. Do not disappear into your head, where all the warnings and rules and consequences live. Be here, with me. Now." So she did. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin cooling in the firelight. Edwin's arm was solid beneath Regina's head, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. Words felt dangerous, too close to reality. Regina should leave, should gather her clothes and her mask, and disappear back into the ball before anyone noticed her absence. Before this perfect, reckless night became mourning and consequences. But she could not seem to move. Edwin's breathing had slowed, deepened. Regina turned her head carefully and found him asleep, his face younger in unconsciousness, the hard edges of control smoothed away. She studied him in the firelight, memorized the angle of his jaw, the dark lashes against his cheek, the slight furrow between his brows that lingered even in sleep. This was the man society feared, the ruthless duke who bent the world to his will. But here, now, he looked almost vulnerable. Regina's chest tightened with an emotion she could not afford to name. She had known this would be complicated, had understood the risks, but she had not anticipated this. The tenderness, the connection, the way her heart had decided, somewhere between the garden and this bed, that it belonged to a man who did not even know her real name. The clock on the mantel chimed 2. Regina closed her eyes and allowed herself one more minute, one more breath of this impossible moment. Then, moving with the same careful silence that had defined her life, she extracted herself from Edwin's embrace. He stirred slightly but did not wake. Regina dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with fastenings in the darkness. The mask went back on, the final barrier between this night and tomorrow. At the door, she paused, looked back one last time at the man sleeping in rumpled sheets, firelight painting him in shades of bronze. "I am sorry," she whispered. Then she opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the only genuine connection she had felt in years, leaving behind the one night she would never be able to forget. Dawn broke cold and grey over Blackthorn Manor. Regina stood at her window, watching light creep across the grounds, feeling as though she existed in 2 separate bodies. One was the woman who had danced and kissed and given herself to the Duke with abandon. The other was the woman standing here now, dressed in her plain work dress, her hair pinned severely back, her face carefully blank. The second woman was the one who would survive. The first woman could not be allowed to exist in daylight. Regina pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Every part of her body ached in ways that were new, unfamiliar, and devastating in their intimacy. She could still feel Edwin's hands on her skin, still hear his voice in the darkness, low and rough with desire, still remember the way he had looked at her, as though she mattered. She closed her eyes and forced the memories down, locked them away in a place she would never access again. Because that night was over, finished, a single moment of recklessness that she could never repeat. Starting now, Regina Wells would return to being invisible, and the Duke would never know that the woman in his bed had been the same woman who organized his correspondence and balanced his accounts and existed 3 floors above him in careful, deliberate silence. It was better this way, safer. The alternative was unthinkable. A knock at her door made Regina straighten. "Miss Wells?" A young maid's voice, nervous. His Grace requests the household accounts be brought to his study within the hour. Regina's stomach dropped. I will bring them directly. Footsteps retreated down the hall. Regina stared at her reflection in the window glass. Pale, composed, unremarkable. The mask of efficiency she had perfected over 3 years. She could do this. She just needed to remain calm, deliver the accounts, answer any questions with her usual brevity, and never to ever allow him to see beyond the careful facade she had constructed. 30 minutes later, ledgers clutched against her chest like armor, Regina descended the stairs toward the Duke's study. She found him standing at the window, still dressed in the same shirt from the night before, though his coat had been discarded and his collar loosened. He looked disheveled, almost human. Regina's heart stuttered painfully. "Your Grace." Her voice came out steady, professional. "The accounts you requested." Edwin turned. For one terrible electric moment, their eyes met. Regina saw something flash across his expression. Recognition? Impossible. She wore no mask now, no silk. She was Regina Wells, unremarkable and invisible. But his gaze lingered on her face just a fraction longer than necessary. "Place them on the desk," he said finally. Regina moved forward, acutely aware of every step, every breath. She set the ledgers down with careful precision and stepped back, preparing to leave. "Miss Wells." She stopped, did not turn. "Your Grace?" Silence stretched. Regina could feel his attention on her back, heavy and searching. "The ball last night," Edwin said slowly. "Did you attend?" Regina's blood turned to ice. "No, Your Grace. My duties required—" "Of course." His tone was flat, disappointed. "You were managing preparations." "Yes, Your Grace." "And you saw nothing unusual? No one who should not have been present?" The question felt like a trap. Regina forced herself to turn, to meet his eyes with the blank politeness she had perfected. "I remained in the kitchens for most of the evening, Your Grace. I would not have noticed guests." Edwin's jaw tightened. He looked away, toward the window again, and Regina saw something in his profile that made her chest ache. Loss. Confusion. The expression of a man who had woken alone and could not understand why. "That will be all," he said quietly. Regina curtsied and fled. The next 3 days were torture. Edwin did not summon her again, but Regina felt his presence like a weight throughout the manor. She heard servants whispering that the Duke had become even more withdrawn than usual, that he spent hours in his study, staring at nothing, that he had dismissed 2 guests without explanation and cancelled a dinner engagement that had been planned for weeks. He was looking for her. Regina knew this with absolute certainty. Knew he was replaying the night in his mind, searching for clues, or trying to make sense of a woman who had appeared and disappeared like smoke. She should feel safe, should feel relieved that he had no way to connect the mysterious woman in the mask to the quiet administrator who moved through his household like a ghost. Instead, she felt hollow. On the 4th day, Francis Bowman arrived. Regina was in the library, cataloguing new acquisitions, when she heard voices in the hall. She recognized Edwin's low tones immediately. The second voice was unfamiliar, smooth, cultured, faintly amused. "You summoned me urgently," Francis was saying. "I assume this involves more than your usual social obligations." "I need you to review the guest list from the ball," Edwin replied. "Every name, every invitation. I need to know if anyone attended who should not have been there." Regina's hands froze on the book she was holding. "Looking for someone specific?" Francis asked. A pause. "A woman." "Ah." Francis's tone shifted into something knowing. "And this woman made an impression. She left." The words carried weight. Pain. Regina's throat tightened. "Women leave balls all the time, Edwin. Sometimes before midnight even. Not like this." Edwin's voice was rough. She was real, Francis. The first genuine thing I have encountered in years, and I do not even know her name. Silence. Regina pressed back against the bookshelf, her heart pounding so hard she feared they would hear it through the walls. I will review the list, Francis said finally. But Edwin, if this woman chose to leave without explanation, perhaps you should respect that choice. No. The word was absolute. I will find her. Footsteps moved away down the hall. Regina sank to the floor, books forgotten, hands shaking. He was not going to let this go, was not going to accept her disappearance as the ending she had intended. He was going to hunt for her, and Regina had no idea how long her carefully constructed invisibility would hold. A week passed, then 2. Edwin's investigation continued with quiet, methodical intensity. He interviewed servants, reviewed guest records, spoke to women who might have attended, searching their faces for something he could not name. Regina watched from the shadows, her anxiety mounting with each passing day, and then, 3 weeks after the ball, Lady Catherine Osborne arrived for tea. Regina was arranging flowers in the drawing room when the woman swept in, beautiful and poised and utterly confident. She wore a gown the exact shade of midnight blue that Regina's borrowed dress had been. Her hair was styled similarly, her height matched. Regina's stomach turned to stone. Catherine had claimed to be the mysterious woman, and society, desperate for scandal and romance, had accepted the claim without question. Why would they not? Catherine was exactly the kind of woman a duke should desire. Wealthy, well-connected, socially impeccable. Nothing like Regina. Regina finished the flowers quickly and moved to leave, but Catherine's voice stopped her. "You there? Girl?" Regina turned slowly. "My lady." Catherine barely glanced at her. "Have these flowers removed and replaced with roses. White, not pink." "Of course. Oh, my lady." Regina gathered the arrangement and left, her hands trembling with a mixture of relief and something that felt disturbingly like jealousy. It did not matter. Catherine's claim would end Edwin's search, would give him someone to focus on, someone appropriate, someone who could exist in his world without risking ruin. It was better this way. Regina had to believe that, even as her heart shattered quietly in her chest. The formal announcement was set for a month hence. Duke Edwin Blackthorne and Lady Catherine Osborne would appear together at the Ashworth Ball, confirming their connection. Society buzzed with speculation and approval. It was a perfect match, expected, appropriate. Regina watched preparations unfold with numb detachment. She coordinated with Catherine's household regarding joint social obligations. She arranged for gifts to be sent. She ensured every detail of the Duke's calendar aligned with this new reality. And she buried the night of the ball so deeply that she almost convinced herself it had been a dream. Almost. Edwin had become a stranger again. He moved through the manor with the same cold distance he had always maintained, his brief moment of vulnerability sealed away behind aristocratic control. When he looked at Regina now, it was with the same impersonal regard he offered to furniture. Useful, necessary, invisible, which was exactly what Regina needed, except it felt like dying. She told herself to be grateful, told herself that Catherine's claim had saved her from discovery and ruin, that this ending, though painful, was the only safe one. But later tonight, alone in her small room, Regina allowed herself to remember. The way Edwin had kissed her, the gentleness of his hands, the way he had looked at her as though she were the only real thing in his carefully controlled world. She had ruined him for anyone else, and he had ruined her too. The Ashworth Ball arrived with typical aristocratic excess. Regina did not attend. She had learned her lesson about masked gatherings and borrowed confidence. Instead, she remained at Blackthorne Manor, organizing correspondence and trying not to think about Edwin standing beside Catherine, announcing their future to a room full of people who would never know the truth. She was nearly finished when footsteps approached down the hall. Regina looked up to find Edwin in the doorway. He should have been at the ball. The announcement was scheduled for 11. It was barely 9. "Your Grace." Regina stood quickly. "I did not expect. Is something wrong?" Edwin moved into the room with slow deliberation. His evening clothes were perfect, his appearance flawless, but his eyes were wrong. Too intense, too focused. On her. "Miss Wells," he said, quietly, "how long have you worked in my household?" Regina's heart began to pound. 3 years, Your Grace." 3 years. He moved closer. "And in that time, have you ever lied to me?" The question hit like a physical blow. Regina's throat closed. Your Grace, I do not understand. Answer the question." His tone was not angry. It was devastatingly calm. The control of a man who had already made up his mind and was simply confirming what he knew. Regina's hands trembled. "I have endeavored to be truthful in all my duties." Endeavored. Edwin's mouth twisted. A careful word. Now diplomatic. He was 3 feet away now. Close enough that Regina could see the storm building in his eyes. Close enough that she could smell the faint scent of bergamot that would forever remind her of darkness and desire. "The ball," Edwin said. 3 weeks ago. Where were you that night?" Regina's mind raced, searching for escape, for some explanation that would satisfy him without revealing the truth. "I told you, Your Grace. I was managing—" "Liar." The word cut through her defenses like a blade. Edwin closed the remaining distance between them, not touching but near enough that Regina had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His jaw was tight, his expression controlled, but she could see the fury and hurt and desperate need beneath it. "I spoke to every servant in this house," he said quietly. "Every single one. And do you know what I learned, Miss Wells?" Regina could not speak, could barely breathe. "No one saw you in the kitchens that night. No one saw you anywhere, because you were not managing preparations." His voice dropped to something rough, something raw. "You were with me." Silence crashed between them. Regina felt her carefully constructed world crumbling. "Your Grace, do not." Edwin's hand lifted, hovering near her face but not touching. "Do not lie to me again. I have spent 3 weeks searching for a ghost. 3 weeks believing the woman who made me feel alive for the first time in years had disappeared forever. And all this time, you have been here. 3 floors above me, close enough to touch." Tears burned behind Regina's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "You do not understand. Then explain it to me." "I cannot." "Why?" The word was almost a plea. "Why did you run? Why did you let me believe—" His voice cracked. "Why did you let Catherine claim to be you?" Regina's composure shattered. "Because she is appropriate. Because she fits into your world. Because if society knew the truth, if anyone discovered that you spent that night with someone like me—" "Someone like you," Edwin repeated softly, dangerously. "And what exactly are you, Regina, that makes you so unworthy?" The sound of her name on his lips, spoken with such intensity, nearly broke her. "I am no one. I have no family, no position, no protection. I have a past that would destroy any reputation I tried to build. And if you were connected to me, if anyone knew, I would be ruined." Edwin's laugh was bitter. "I am a duke, and society cannot ruin me. But I would be destroyed." Regina's voice broke. "Do you not understand? For you, I would be a scandal, an inconvenience, a whisper quickly forgotten, but for me—" She could not continue, could not put into words the crushing weight of how completely her life would disintegrate if anyone knew the truth. Edwin went very still. His hand, still hovering near her face, finally made contact. His fingers traced her jaw with devastating gentleness. "You think I would allow that to happen?" he asked quietly. "You could not prevent it. You underestimate what I am capable of." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Regina's breath caught. "I have spent 3 years pretending not to notice you, pretending that the most intelligent, most genuine person in my household was invisible. Because I knew that if I acknowledged you, if I allowed myself to want you, I would never be satisfied with anyone else." Regina stared at him, shock stealing her words. "That night," Edwin continued, his voice rough with emotion, "when you appeared at the ball, I didn't know it was you. But something in me recognized you anyway, responded to you. And when I woke alone, when I realized you had fled..." His jaw clenched. "I have been searching for you, only to discover you never actually left." "Edwin, do you know what I felt when Catherine claimed to be you?" His hand moved to cup her face fully. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because she is not you. She has never been you." Tears spilled down Regina's cheeks. "This is impossible." "Nothing is impossible." Edwin rested his forehead against hers. "But I need you to stop running. I need you to trust that I will not let society destroy you." "How?" Regina whispered. "How can you promise that?" "By doing what I should have done the moment I woke alone." Edwin pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "By claiming you. Publicly. Deliberately. In a way that makes it clear to everyone that you are not a scandal. You are my choice." Regina's breath stuttered. "You cannot mean..." "I am not marrying Catherine." His voice was absolute. "I am not marrying anyone except you." The world tilted. Regina pulled away, shaking her head. "You do not know what you are saying. The scandal will exist for approximately 3 weeks, and then society will find something new to gossip about." Edwin caught her hand, holding it against his chest. "Regina, I am offering you protection. My name, my position, everything I have that can shield you from the consequences you fear. In exchange for what? Nothing." His expression softened. "I am not negotiating. I am asking. Stay. Be with me. Let me prove that what happened between us was not just one night, that it could be everything." Regina wanted to believe him, wanted it with a desperation that terrified her. But years of survival instincts screamed warnings. "I need time," she whispered. Edwin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "You have until midnight." "Midnight?" "The announcement at the Ashworth ball. I will either confirm my engagement to Catherine," his voice went rough, "or I will announce my intention to court someone else. You have until then to decide which future you want." He released her hand and stepped back, his expression carefully controlled once more. But Regina could see the vulnerability beneath it, the fear that she would choose safety over him, just as she had 3 weeks ago. Edwin turned and walked toward the door, paused at the threshold without looking back. "I know you are afraid," he said quietly, "but I am afraid too. Afraid that the only person who has ever made me feel real will choose to remain a ghost." Then he was gone, leaving Regina alone with a choice that would define the rest of her life. Regina stood frozen in the center of the room for what felt like hours. Her mind raced through possibilities, consequences, futures that branched in opposite directions based on a single decision. Safety versus desire, invisibility versus recognition, survival versus living. All her life, Regina had chosen survival, and it had kept her breathing. But had it kept her alive? She thought about the past 3 years, the careful silence, the deliberate erasure of herself from every room she entered. She had been so focused on not being ruined that she had forgotten how to exist as anything other than a function, until one night when she had worn a mask and allowed herself to be seen, until Edwin had looked at her as though she were worth seeing. Regina pressed her hands against her face, feeling tears she could no longer contain. She was terrified, absolutely, bone-deep terrified of what would happen if she said yes, if she stepped into the light and allowed society to judge her. But she was also terrified of what would happen if she said no, if she spent the rest of her life wondering what could have been. Midnight approached with terrible inevitability. Regina found herself dressed in the same plain work clothes, hair still severely pinned, face scrubbed clean of any artifice. She looked nothing like the woman who had danced with a duke, nothing like someone who belonged at an aristocratic ball. But she was going anyway. The walk to the Ashworth estate took 20 minutes, long enough for Regina to turn back a dozen times, long enough for every survival instinct to scream that this was madness. She kept walking. The ballroom blazed with light and laughter. Through the tall windows, Regina could see the glittering crowd, see Edwin standing near the center, Catherine beside him, in a gown that probably cost more than Regina earned in a year. They looked perfect together, expected, safe. Regina's courage faltered. What was she doing? She did not belong in that world. Could never belong. Edwin might offer her protection, but he could not shield her from the fundamental truth that she was an outsider, trying to force her way into a society that would never truly accept her. She should turn around, should let him make his announcement, should return to Blackthorn Manor and pack her belongings and disappear before the pain of watching him move on became unbearable. But then Edwin turned. Their eyes met through the glass, and Regina saw everything she needed to see in that single glance. Recognition, hope, desperate, aching need. He was waiting for her, had been waiting since the moment she fled his bed 3 weeks ago. Regina's hands stopped shaking. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked through the front entrance. The ballroom fell silent as she entered. Regina felt every eye turn toward her, and felt the weight of judgment and curiosity and confusion. She did not belong here. Everyone knew it. Everyone could see it. But she kept walking, across the polished floor, through the crowd that parted before her like water, toward the man standing at the center with his entire world balanced on what happened next. Regina! Edwin's voice carried across the silence. Not Miss Wells. Not a formal title. Just her name, spoken with such relief and intensity that Regina felt tears threaten again. Catherine stepped forward, her expression cold. What is the meaning of this? Who is this woman? Edwin did not look away from Regina. She is the woman I am going to marry. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Catherine's face went white with fury. You cannot be serious. She is nothing. She is everything. Edwin moved forward, closing the distance between himself and Regina until they stood face to face in the center of the ballroom. She is brilliant and genuine, and the only person in this entire room who has never once lied to me. Regina's throat closed. Edwin. He took her hand, raised it to his lips, pressed a kiss across her knuckles that felt like a vow. I do not care about scandal, he said quietly, though his voice carried to every corner of the room. I do not care about expectations, or propriety, or what society believes is appropriate. I care about truth, and the truth is that this woman, Regina Wells, is the only person I want beside me. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, Evangeline Foster's voice rang out. Well, finally. I was beginning to think you would never figure it out. Laughter broke the tension. Not universal. Not accepting. But enough to shift the atmosphere from shock to speculation. Edwin's eyes never left Regina's. Will you give me your answer?" Regina looked up at him, at this man who had dismantled his entire social world to stand beside her, who had chosen her over safety, over expectation, over everything he was supposed to want. And she realized something fundamental. She had spent 3 years believing that invisibility kept her safe. But true safety was not hiding. It was being seen by someone who would stand between you and the world if necessary. "Yes," Regina whispered. Edwin's expression cracked into something that almost resembled joy. He pulled her close, his forehead dropping to rest against hers in an echo of that night in the garden. "Thank God," he breathed. The aftermath was chaos. Catherine stormed from the ballroom, her friends following in a wave of indignation. Society split immediately into factions, those scandalized by the Duke's choice, and those fascinated by the romance of it all. Regina stood at Edwin's side, his hand firm around hers, and felt the weight of judgment like a physical thing. But Edwin did not waver. When Francis Bowman approached with a sardonic smile, Edwin introduced Regina formally. When Nathaniel Scott questioned the wisdom of such a public declaration, Edwin's response was cold enough to freeze blood. "My personal life is not subject to committee approval." And slowly, grudgingly, society began to shift. Because Edwin Blackthorne was not a man who could be socially destroyed. He was too powerful, too wealthy, too necessary to the aristocratic machinery. If he chose to elevate an unknown woman, their society would eventually accept it, or be excluded from his favor. By the time the ball ended, Regina's head was spinning. She had been introduced to more titled individuals than she could remember, had received stiff congratulations and thinly veiled insults in equal measure, had felt Edwin's presence beside her like armor, deflecting the worst of the cruelty with nothing more than a look. Outside, in the cool night air, Edwin finally allowed himself to relax. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Regina considered the question. She had just upended her entire life, had stepped into a world that did not want her, had chosen risk over safety for the first time since Victor Collins had tried to destroy her. But Edwin's hand was warm in hers, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt real. "I am terrified," she admitted. "What good?" Edwin pulled her close. "So am I." Regina looked up at him in surprise. "You are?" "Absolutely." His thumb traced circles against her palm. "But I would rather be terrified with you than comfortable alone." The words settled into Regina's chest like truth. She rose on her toes and kissed him. Soft, gentle. A promise rather than passion. When they pulled apart, Edwin was smiling. Actually smiling, with warmth that transformed his entire face. "Take me home," Regina whispered. Edwin's eyes darkened. "Are you certain?" "Yes. There will be no more hiding after this." Regina thought about invisibility, about safety purchased through erasure, about the woman she had been and the woman she was choosing to become. "I know," she said, "and I am ready." Edwin's hand tightened in hers. Together, they walked into the future. What morning light filtered through windows Regina had never seen from this angle. She lay in Edwin's bed, their bed now, she supposed, watching dust motes dance in sunbeams. Beside her, Edwin slept deeply, one arm draped across her waist in a possessiveness that should have felt confining, but instead felt like safety. Regina allowed herself a moment to simply exist in this new reality. She had expected the night to feel different now that it was no longer forbidden. Expected the passion to diminish once fear no longer heightened every sensation. But if anything, last night had been more intense, more real. Because this time, Edwin knew exactly who he held, and Regina had not run. Edwin stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly. When his gaze found hers, his expression softened into something that made Regina's chest tight. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Good morning." His hand moved up to trace her face, as though confirming she was real. "I was afraid I had dreamed this." "I'm still terrified I will wake up and discover I have," Regina admitted. Edwin pulled her closer. "Then we will be terrified together." They lay in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the manor was beginning to wake, servants moving through halls, the distant clatter of breakfast preparations, the machinery of aristocratic life that Regina had observed for 3 years, but never participated in. Until now. "What happens next?" she asked softly. Edwin considered the question. "Formally, I will make a public announcement of our engagement. There will be a period of scrutiny during which society attempts to uncover every detail of your past. Some will be cruel, as many will be suspicious, but gradually, particularly if we present a unified front, acceptance will come." Regina's stomach tightened. "And if they discover Victor Collins?" Edwin went very still. "Who is Victor Collins?" Regina closed her eyes. She had known this conversation would come, had known that choosing Edwin meant revealing every dark corner of her past, but knowing did not make it easier. "A man who tried to ruin me 2 years ago," she said quietly. "I was working at an estate in Sussex. He was a guest. He became interested in me. When I refused his advances, he spread rumors, lies about my character, about my willingness to engage in inappropriate conduct." Edwin's arm tightened around her. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously calm. "What did he do, specifically?" Regina forced herself to continue. "He cornered me in a library, tried to kiss me. I fought him off, but he was stronger. If the butler had not interrupted..." She could not finish the sentence. "Where is he now?" Edwin's tone had gone cold, the voice of a man accustomed to wielding power without mercy. "I do not know. He left the estate shortly after, but his whispers followed me. That is why I have been so careful, why I needed to remain invisible." Regina opened her eyes and met Edwin's gaze. "If he hears that you are connected to me, he may try to use the past against us." "Let him try." Edwin's expression was steel. "I will destroy him so thoroughly that he will wish he had never heard your name." Regina's throat tightened. "Edwin, no one hurts you without consequences, Regina. No one. Not society. Not some pathetic man who mistakes cruelty for power. To no one." The absolute conviction in his voice made something crack open in Regina's chest. For 2 years, she had carried the weight of Victor's actions alone, had believed herself tainted by association with his lies, but Edwin did not see her as damaged. He saw her as his, and he would defend that claim with everything he possessed. "Thank you," Regina whispered. Edwin kissed her forehead. "You do not need to thank me for protecting what is mine." The next weeks were simultaneously exhilarating and exhausting. Edwin formally announced their engagement in the Times, sending shockwaves through society. Invitations to balls and dinners poured in, some genuine, many simply curious to observe the spectacle of a duke marrying so far beneath his station. Regina attended them all on Edwin's arm, her spine straight and her expression calm, even as whispers followed her through every ballroom. Evangeline became an unexpected ally, publicly supporting Regina and bringing other influential women into her circle. Frances Bowman, after initial skepticism, proved surprisingly helpful in deflecting the worst of society's cruelty with sardonic commentary that made mockery of those who gossiped too openly. And Edwin remained constant, a solid presence beside her, never wavering, never allowing anyone to diminish her in his presence. But the scrutiny was relentless. Every detail of Regina's past was examined, the estates where she had worked, the families she had served, the suspicious gap in her employment when Victor's lies had nearly destroyed her. And then, inevitably, Victor Collins himself appeared. He attended a dinner party that Regina and Edwin were also invited to. She saw him across the room and felt ice flood through her veins. He looked the same. Handsome in a practiced way. Smile too charming, eyes too calculating. Edwin noticed her reaction immediately. What is wrong? Regina could not speak, could only stare at the man who had tried to ruin her. Edwin followed her gaze. His expression went dangerously cold. Is that him? Regina nodded. Stay here, Edwin said quietly. Edwin, do not. But he was already moving. Regina watched, heart pounding, as Edwin crossed the room with deliberate purpose. Watched as he approached Victor with the controlled menace of a predator approaching prey. The conversation was too quiet for Regina to hear, but she saw Victor's expression shift from confusion to recognition to fear, or saw Edwin lean close and speak words that made all color drain from Victor's face. Then Edwin turned and walked back to Regina, offering his arm without a word. What did you say to him? Regina asked as they left the party. Edwin's expression was calm, almost pleasant. I explained that if he ever speaks your name again, if he ever so much as thinks about you in a way I would find objectionable, I will use every resource at my disposal to ensure he is ruined so completely that he will spend the rest of his life begging for scraps. Regina stared at him. Edwin. He will not trouble you again, Edwin said with absolute certainty. I made sure of it. And true to his word, Victor Collins disappeared from London society within the week. Rumour suggested he had relocated to the continent, permanently. Regina did not ask what Edwin had done to ensure that outcome. Some things were better left unknown. 3 months after the Ashworth ball, Regina stood in front of a mirror in a wedding gown. It was not the extravagant confection society expected. Regina had insisted on something simpler, elegant but understated, a dress that reflected who she actually was, rather than who society thought she should become. Evangeline stood beside her, adjusting the veil with careful fingers. Are you nervous? Evangeline asked. Regina considered the question. In a few hours she would walk down the aisle of London's most prestigious church, would stand beside Edwin in front of every member of society who had spent the past 3 months dissecting her past and judging her worth, would become the Duchess of Blackthorn. No, Regina said softly. I am not nervous, Evangeline smiled. Good, because you deserve this, all of it. Regina met her friend's eyes in the mirror. Thank you. For the mask, for the gown, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Evangeline's expression softened. You were always visible, Regina. You just needed the right person to notice. The ceremony was beautiful. Regina walked down the aisle alone. She had no family to give her away, and felt no shame in it. She had given herself to Edwin months ago, in a darkened room where neither of them had known the other's name. This was simply the public acknowledgement of a choice already made. Edwin waited at the altar, his expression carefully controlled. But when Regina reached him and placed her hand in his, she saw his composure crack, saw vulnerability and love and desperate relief. "'Twas you came," he whispered. Regina smiled. "Did you think I would run? I have learned not to assume anything where you are concerned." The ceremony proceeded with traditional formality. Vows were spoken, rings exchanged, and when the priest finally pronounced them married, Edwin kissed Regina with a tenderness that made her forget the hundreds of witnesses watching. Outside the church, society waited to judge them. But Regina no longer cared. She had spent 3 years being invisible. And now, finally, she was ready to be seen. The wedding breakfast was held at Blackthorn Manor, transformed for the occasion into something between a palace and a garden. Flowers everywhere. Music floating through open windows. Tables laden with food that Regina had once helped coordinate, but now simply enjoyed. She moved through the celebration on Edwin's arm, accepting congratulations from people who had scorned her months ago. Some were genuine in their good wishes. Many were not. Regina found she could distinguish between the two with ease now, and the false well-wishers no longer had power to hurt her. Near evening, Edwin pulled her away from the crowds, leading her through familiar corridors to the room where everything had begun. The private study with walls of books and windows overlooking the garden. "I have something for you," Edwin said. He retrieved a small box from his desk and placed it in Regina's hands. Inside was a delicate silver mask. The same design she had worn the night of the ball, recreated in precious metal and set with tiny diamonds that caught the light. "I do not understand," Regina said softly. "That night," Edwin explained, "you wore a mask because you needed protection, needed distance, needed to be someone else to feel safe." His hands covered hers, warm and certain. "I never want you to feel that way again. This mask is not for hiding. It is a reminder that you survived, that you chose courage over fear, that you became the woman standing before me now." Tears spilled down Regina's cheeks. Edwin caught them with gentle fingers. "No more running, Regina. No more invisibility. You are the Duchess of Blackthorn now, and that means you get to exist exactly as you are, without apology." Regina set the mask aside and pulled Edwin close, kissing him with all the emotion she couldn't put into words. Gratitude and love and fierce, aching relief that she had chosen this. Chosen him. Chosen to stop hiding. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Edwin rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I should have said it before, now. Should have made it clear. But I love you, Regina. More than I thought myself capable of loving anyone." Regina's heart stuttered. "I love you too. I have since that first night, though I tried desperately not to." Edwin laughed softly. "We are both terrible at self-preservation, it seems." "Apparently." Regina smiled through tears. "But I would not change anything." "Neither would I." They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other through masks and distance, and the desperate hope that genuine connection still existed in a world built on performance. Outside, the celebration continued. But here, in this quiet room where everything had begun, what Regina Wells, now Regina Blackthorn, allowed herself to finally, completely, irreversibly believe in the impossible. That she was safe, that she was loved, that she was home. Years later, when people asked about the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, the story they told was always the same. A love affair that began at a masked ball. A duke who fell for a mysterious woman and refused to give up until he found her. A romance worthy of novels and whispered gossip. But those who knew the truth understood it differently. Regina had not needed to be found. She had needed to be seen, and Edwin had looked past every mask, every defense, every carefully constructed wall, until he saw the woman beneath. The woman who had been there all along, waiting, just 3 floors above, close enough to touch, if only someone had bothered to look. If Regina and Edwin's story captured your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Ariella Duke Romance Library for more sweeping Victorian romances. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and which moment hit you the hardest. The masked ball, the morning after, or that final confrontation. Thank you for being here. Until next time, choose courage over fear.